Hello, this is Daryl Ehrlich with the Billings Gazette, and it is September 24th, 2015, and I am here in studio today with Don Agan, Agan, and he was in the Marines, and he is here to share his Vietnam stories as part of our Vietnam Voices series. And it's my pleasure to have him here, and I thank him for being here. So, Don, let's talk about, you were in the Marines.
Yes, sir.
And what years did you you serve in the Marines?
Well, I went in '64 and got out in '67 with 3 years of service.
And let's talk a little bit about where you were before in 1964. Where were you, and what were you doing?
I was, after I graduated from senior high school in '63, I went to Pocatello, Idaho, and I was living out there, and I got a job working in a grocery store out there. And I got my draft notice belated from my parents, who I'd contacted, and they told me that I had a letter that they had received, and they opened and knew what it was. It was from the Selected Service Board, Draft Board. And so I asked them, well, what am I supposed to do? You know, so my mother says, well, just go down to the post office and probably you can find the Selected Service Board down there and whatnot. So basically that started the whole process, and I was, I didn't know what was going on. I listed for the Selected Service in a town in Hartle,
Okay.
Which is Wheatland County, which is probably not nearly as populated as Yellowstone County. Even though my parents lived in Yellowstone County, I was staying with my grandparents up there and going to school up there, and when I turned 18. And so I probably was, sparsely populated county, I didn't stand a chance that I'd be probably selected for draft notice.
Right. That's got to be, you're in Pocatello, you're minding your own business, and did the idea of a draft ever cross your mind? Was it something that you thought about, or was this totally out of left field, so to speak?
Well, I was basically, from my first year out of high school, and I was shocked by the fact that I was getting this situation when I was starting to get things together. I was planning to go into college in Idaho State in Pocatello, and it just didn't. It just blew my mind to be able to have to give up all the things that I was starting to accomplish and wanting to do, and it just, I was devastated by it. And I went up to the Selective Service in Boise, Idaho, and they basically did a physical on me and everything else, and I told them that I had a problem, that I received a dislocated shoulder while playing in football in Billings, and it bothered me. And I had a problem with that, and they kept, well, we don't see any problems with you, all this and that. So I get back to, well, they told me that I got classified as 1A, and I could either join up now, or I could wait and get drafted, or could go into Pocatello and get select my own branch of service. So I went back to Pocatello, and I checked the different branches of the service, and I ended up selecting the Marine Corps.
Okay.
And it was, I requested that I basically have a delayed enlistment so that I could basically take my vehicle and possessions back to Billings and drop them off. And then I basically went from Billings up to Butte, and then was given a physical and given a plane ticket to, actually I was sworn in again, and then given a plane ticket to San Diego to the Marine Corps recruiting depot.
Okay. And let's talk about why did you choose the Marines? Because if you had your choice, why Marines?
Well, I really wanted to go in the construction battalion in the Navy, the Seabees.
Mm-hmm.
but it was like a 4-year hitch. The Marine Corps was 3-year hitch. If I'd been drafted, I could have gone in the Army maybe 2 years. And they were drafting men in my unit in the Marine Corps. They were basically selecting either the Army and the Marines. And I had men that in Vietnam that were shorter time in service than I did. My 3 years.
Wow. Huh. Did you, so it wasn't so much just what Marines did, it was just the idea of timing then, if you're going to have to enlist.
Well, yeah. I mean, I had a friend that basically I was engaged to, and the thing about it is that it's raw stubsy on my part, because I got a Dear John from that individual about a year and a half after I had joined the Marine Corps.
Wow, that's that we've heard some of those stories that's one of the things that you lose sometimes are those relationships when you make that sacrifice. So, did you come from a military family? Had they served?
Oh yes.
Okay.
My father was in the Army Air Corps station in England when I was born. He didn't see me until 2 years later, and he was in the B-17 squadron he actually had the same MOS that I had, chemical warfare.
Huh.
And he served over in England, and he had stories about his adventures on the B-17s and things like that.
So did his experience make you more or less, or did it really matter for going into the service yourself?
No. He told me after he found out that I enlisted in the Marine Corps, he says, you're dumb for going in the Marine Corps. Because he had been exposed probably to Marines and whatnot, and they're,
right,
kind of a tough bunch of guys. And
yeah. So what was, let's talk about basic training and then AIT for you.
Okay. My basic training went into San Diego, and it was hell. I mean, really, it was hell. Going through the Marine Corps training, they did a mental trip to your mind, and they wore your body down physically. And I remember one of the things that we did is we had to get down on our hands and knees and pray to the gods that there would be a war in Vietnam. This is just to psych us up so we would want to really get the top-notch training and physical ability.
Wow. And so you thought did you think that was odd at the time, or what was your thought of that?
Well, we were so psyched up on everything,
Mm-hmm.
And I actually turned 21 in boot camp on KP, washing dishes. And
what a way to spend your 21st birthday.
Yeah, I thought so too.
That sounds miserable. I can't imagine. Not only are you in boot camp, there's a war going on, but then you pull kitchen patrol on your 21st birthday.
Yeah.
Miserable.
Yeah.
So you survived boot camp, though, I'm assuming.
Well, I did. Boot camp, I had a hard time with it. Some of the things that they did, like we'd be in the shower. All of the Marines in the squad would be in the shower, and we were butt naked, and we were having to basically cadence walk, duck walk in the shower, and then doing about faces. And, just butt to belly kind of a situation. And it was demoralizing as far as I was concerned, to be that close to another male. I just, but I guess, it was just part of the psychological situation with it.
Yeah. What did you do after boot camp? Then what was your MOS? I know a lot of the Marines trained as grunts, as infantry, but did you, or what was your training?
Well, actually, before I got into my unit that I was designated with, because I had a woman Marine interview me and asked me if being as I was from Montana, did I know how to drive a tractor? I says, yes, ma'am, I know how to drive a tractor. And she says, well, you can drive a truck then. And so I was assigned to motor transport, 1st Marine Division.
Okay.
But before I actually got to my assigned duty station, I was in what we call advanced infantry training, which was basically learning about the weapons and, you know, like the different types of machine guns and all that kind of stuff. One of the practices we did was that we had to throw a grenade from a pit, and I had to throw this grenade, and the Marine, after I tossed it, basically said, get down, and he actually got on top of me, and we're in the pit, and he says, you didn't throw that very far. Well, the problem was because I had a bum shoulder, and the draft board basically said there was nothing wrong with me, is because my shoulder just dislodges from, or my arm dislodges from my shoulder. And that's because if I throw anything like a ball or anything like that, I get a partial dislodge out of it.
And that had to be kind of scary.
Well, it was scary for the Marine that was with me, and because we almost killed her. I almost killed us.
Yeah, but you told them that you had this bum shoulder, and now.
Yeah, and you know, just that at that time, anybody with a warm body, that's all they were interested in too.
Yeah. Is this in 1965 then, or 64 when you're training?
Well, it was 64.
Okay, so there wasn't really much of. I mean, at that time we hadn't necessarily. We had advisors over in Vietnam, but it wasn't full blown. But they were kind of staging up, right? Is that kind of what I get the sense of? They were getting ready for it.
Well, yes, we hadn't gone. We weren't getting staged up until about 65.
Okay.
And I was stationed with 1st Motor Transit in Camp Pendleton, and where I learned to operate in a 2-week course how to operate the 6x6 deuce and a half.
Okay. And what was that like? What was driving? We've heard a lot of deuce and half story. Everybody comes in, travels around on these. What were they like? Let's describe.
They were actually kind of a kiddie car to drive. I mean, they weren't such a big situation. I mean, once you realized what you had and how to operate it, it was a piece of cake. But the bad part was that when I got my driver's license, that I became an in-truck trainee for the other Marines that were going through the motor transport system, and they were coming in from the different battalions and getting driver's license, and we had to basically sit in the passenger side while they drove the truck. And one part that was scary was we had a hill that they'd climb at about 60-degree angle, and I would sit at the bottom of the hill and I'd talk to the Marine that was basically driving the truck, and I told him, I says, you know how to drive the truck, you have no problem, and if something happens, what do? You know, and I says, you hit the clutch or step the clutch and hit the brake, and then from there, what do? He says, I don't know. So I tell him, I says, okay, you got a hand throttle, and I says, you got an emergency brake. So let your foot off the brake, see if your emergency brake holds. If it holds, then you're fine. Then all you got to do is just basically release the emergency brake and then start out in low gear. And never had that happen. But the problem was the emergency brake was on the left side of the driver, and it was too far for me to get, even though in a situation. We went through the process with basically just driving the truck and then driving the truck towing a trailer. And that was even worse because if they started rolling backwards, they got more weight and they would jackknife.
Yeah. Wow. What was the So you got trained there, and then where did you go after training?
Okay. I had been taking courses, or the battalion basically put on information and training in regard to nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare. And supposedly I did fairly well on the test at the end of the training. And they asked me if I wanted to go to an Army school for a month and get advanced training in nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare training. And I said, yeah, I was willing to get away from the Marine Corps. And so I spent a month back in Anniston, Alabama, at Fort McLean, and I did fairly well in the school. And then as soon as I got back to my first motors, I had been reassigned to 3rd Amphibious Tractor Battalion, and at Delmar, which is just across the road from Camp Pendleton. Oh, it's actually part of Camp Pendleton, but as I was dragging my sea bag off the Jeep, I had an officer come up to me and ask me if I was motor transport, had a driver's license. I said, well, yes, sir, I am trained have a license for motor vehicle, deuce and halves and whatnot. He says, well, I'm looking for drivers. And I says, the problem is I've got a new MOS, which trumps the drivers, which was 3,500 MOS versus 5,700 MOS, which is NBC. And I told him, I says, I wouldn't have any problem. I like driving trucks, but I don't know if you can get it cleared with battalion. He says, I'll personally get you checked in and whatnot. And I went into 3rd Amphibious Tractor Battalion, headquarters and supply, and was a truck driver. And one of the first things I did is I went to Barstow, California, and we picked up a conditioned truck. It was a 2.5-ton, 1,200-gallon gasoline refueling truck that had been redone in Barstow. Drove it back, and it was so hot coming out of the desert, Death Valley or whatever it was out there. And I says, can I just open the front window of the truck? We couldn't open that up, and I was going out there with the Jeep, and the Jeep led me back to Pendleton and whatnot. And I got back, and I had to basically PM the truck, check it all out, and basically had to change 10 tires on the truck. I did that in about 3 days, put 1,200 gallons of gasoline on the truck.
Wow. 10 tires. Those are big tires.
Yeah, it was the term 6x6 basically refers to it has 3 driver axles, and it had on the back axles, the 2 axles basically had 4 tires.
So yeah, that's a lot of. Those are big tough trucks.
Well, the trucks are just basically no bigger than farm trucks, and I drove farm trucks on 2 Dot, Montana.
Right. What did you do? So you were part of that. When did you find out you were going to Vietnam?
Well, I think we left in March.
Okay.
Of 65.
Did you know anything about Vietnam at the time? Was there any training for Vietnam?
Well, while I was going to senior high school, I was sleeping in civics class, and the teacher asked me a question. I was sleeping away, and they says, well, do you know where Vietnam is? And this gal that was sitting behind me, she pokes me in the back, wakes me up, and I said, no, man, I don't know where, or it was a male teacher, I think, yeah. And I says, no, I don't know where Vietnam is. And so I wasn't too concerned about it until the fact that I was headed out to Vietnam.
Right. What did you Were you surprised to be sent to Vietnam?
No, not really.
Okay. So you get the orders to go. Did you get?
Well, we went as a unit. Yes.
Okay. Because that's pretty early. March 1965 is pretty early. They're sending
Right.
whole groups. How did you ship over there?
Okay, because we had I was in motor transit. We had to basically board what they call an LST, landing ship tank, and it had the bow had double doors that open up, and you had a tank deck, and then you had the top deck, and they had a ramp that they'd drop down so you could load on the top deck, which was down and exposed on the top of the ship, and they weren't very big ships. And because I was driving the tanker, I had to back the 6x6 tanker on the top deck, which was fairly steep. And to back it up, I had never been on the ship, and so I didn't really know what I was doing. But I had the sailors on board the ship basically were guiding us in position and whatnot, so they could fasten us to the deck and whatnot. And it was 30-some days. I think it was about like 40 days. It took us to get from San Diego to Okinawa, Naho, and we went to Camp Swab, which is the northern part of Okinawa.
Okay. And then is that where you stayed, or did you then what happened?
Then we basically I had trouble with my truck because it was sitting out and exposed to all the salt water and spray and whatnot, and I had probably 1.5 inches, 2 inches of crystallized salt on top of that truck. And I cleaned it off in order to get to our camp, but the problem was my brakes were hanging up, and I couldn't get any speed out of the thing, and so the mechanic basically stopped me in a chase vehicle in a Jeep, loosened my brake shoes up so I could get it to camp, and so I had to pull all the wheels off the 6x and redo the brakes on the thing.
Wow, just because of the salt water and that had just kind of eaten through the...
Well, it just basically locked everything up, yeah.
Wow. Did you get to go, did you get leave before you went to... What was that like? Was that nice to at least get leave?
We got Cinderella liberties. In other words, we could check out every night, but we'd have to be in by midnight or before midnight.
But before you left for Vietnam, did you get to come home at all, or did you?
No.
No. All right. So you're shipping over there, and just a year or two before, you couldn't name where Vietnam was. Now you're going there. What are you thinking about going to Vietnam? What do you know at that point, and how are you thinking about it?
Well, we stayed about a month in Okinawa at Camp Swab, and during that time, we were doing different things, but mostly I was running a Jeep for an officer who was basically, I think, probably making arrangements for us transportation to Vietnam and things like that. And I was driving a deuce and a half 6x, hauling troops over to a Navy base, Seabees, and they were basically building frames for our tents. And there was a work crew that I took over there, and then I got a 24-hour liberty out of that, and I spent my time in one of the local villes down there.
Right. And then so when did you finally get to Vietnam? Tell me about that.
Well, it was probably a month later, 2 months later after we got to Okinawa, and then we drove on back to Naha and got aboard another LST into Chulai, Vietnam.
Wow.
But before we actually, I left, there was a notice came down from the battalion that all men that are first sons or only sons of family, please report to the office. Well, I knew what it was all about, but I was an only son, and I didn't go because I wanted to go to Nam.
Wow. That's is that something that you, in retrospect, do you regret?
Not really.
Okay, so you're willing to go to Nam, and so you skipped that message and you kept on going, and you arrive in Vietnam. What is your first? Chu Lai? Is that where you?
It was in
Chu Lai off the South China Sea. What was your first impression of where did you land, and what did you think?
There was a river, and I don't know what the name of the river was, but it was kind of something that the Navy had. This river was big enough where the T's could land and drop their ramps and whatnot, and we could just drive off. We were basically set up that we could actually forage in the ocean if we had to. We had snorkels, exhaust and intake on our vehicles, and we could actually our exhaust stack and our intake manifold were such that we could actually sit on the back of our seats of our trucks and steer with our feet and use the hand throttle, basically get forged into. We didn't have to do it that way.
I didn't know they were built that ruggedly, but that's pretty impressive.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. So you get online, and what are you looking around? What do you see? What do you think of this place? How does it look?
Well, the first impression is kind of like going into a blast furnace. It's so hot, and literally so hot that I don't know, my sinus started draining, and I couldn't even hardly see. It was so bad that I was hot. It was just literally hot, and driving a deuce and a half tanker, the dark green and hot, and I couldn't hardly breathe over there.
Yeah.
And so I got guard duty that night is in camp security, and I says, well, don't I get ammo or something like that for my rifle? And he says, well, we don't know where it's at yet. I says, so if I basically get involved with somebody trying to invade our camp, what am I supposed to do? He says, well, use your gun. Just use it as a club, I guess.
That's guard duty.
That was guard duty.
Yeah.
And that's how unorganized we were, I guess.
Right, and it's new, but we're still not very. Yeah, they pull guard duty, and yet there's no weapons to guard. Did it get better quick, or was it still kind of?
We finally got 100 rounds. I was carrying an M14, which is 7.62, and 100 rounds of 5 magazines, 20-round clips. It's quite a load to carry.
Yeah. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about, so it's hot, it's muggy, and then are you in Chu Lai for a while, or where do you get stationed?
I spent most of my time in Chu Lai, yeah.
Okay. And in 1965, is there a lot of action there in Chu Lai, or?
No, there wasn't.
Okay.
Well, I helped drive trucks and haul concertina wire, which is kind of razor wire, and we did a perimeter defense around our position and whatnot. The Seabees had built watchtowers. Every 5 bunkers, they had a watchtower, and the watchtowers were 2 stories in height, and they were off the ground probably about 40, 50 feet.
And so, would those watchtowers be used at night for guard duty, or do you actually go around the perimeter for guard duty?
No, actually. On the outpost positions, we basically took troops out and manned the bunkers, 5 bunkers, and the watchtower, which the watchtower had four people in it, plus the command of the bunkers. And I was either in the bunkers or I was in command of the tower.
So when you were in command of the tower, what would you do?
Well, basically, the crew, the men in the bunkers got a little nervous at times because the VC would basically try to fire a rifle at us or a gun at us, and try to draw us out. And I just told him, I says, well, do you see anything to shoot at? He says, well, no. I says, well, don't shoot back then. Because if you shoot back, they see your muzzle flash, and they ID where you are.
Huh. So did you, was getting fired at or getting mortared or shelled, was that a common occurrence?
No, it wasn't.
Okay. So at that time, it was pretty calm.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what do you do when you get over there? What do you do daily? What's kind of part of your daily tasks or routines?
Unfortunately, well, I don't know. Unfortunately, it would, if that would be the word, but they told me that I was going to be dispatcher for the motor transport.
Okay.
And I was glad, because I was assigned to the gasoline refueling tanker, which is what we used to fill our tractors or our vehicles and the amphibious tractors. And I call them Amtraks for short.
Okay.
And one tractor would take approximately 200 to 300 gallons of fuel. And they had a bladder in the bottom of the tractor. It was where they filled them up. And but I was dispatcher for about 4 months.
Okay.
And I got sick and tired of it. I just basically couldn't stand it anymore. And so I just told them I wanted to do something else.
So you're bored. So the daily routine is kind of boring.
Well, I mean, you know, I was actually the dispatcher was a 24-hour day job. I was in a tent with another, I think it was a staff sergeant, and he was a black man, and he was a cool dude. I mean, he was a retired football player, and he'd been in the Marine Corps a good many years, and he basically was, you know, he was all right. And but I just got tired of basically, you know, I wanted to do something else.
Right. What would you have liked to have done? I mean, so you're doing some motor pool and transport, but what would you like to do?
Well, I basically told him, I says, I want to operate the wrecker. We had a 5-ton 6x6 wrecker.
Okay.
And I told him that's the vehicle I wanted to drive. Well, you know, we got calls from the division requesting wreckers to go out and retrieve a disabled truck and whatnot. And then I would go out with that. Otherwise, I'd be running cargo trucks and hauling supplies. We were in the motor transport, the supply vehicles that basically hauled everything that the battalion needed.
Was there a lot of things that, because you were disabled, the trucker, that you'd go and get things that were disabled? Was it mostly trucks, or were there downed helicopter?
No. It was just motor vehicles.
Motor vehicles, so trucks.
Deuce and a half and 5 tons.
Did you like that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? Why? What makes that job interesting?
Well, I mean, you know, it was a challenge. I mean, you know, just to learn how to operate the wrecker and know how to basically do what you had to do with it.
Did you, had you had any work like this? Obviously, you'd driven farm truck and you'd done that. Had you ever been a wrecker before?
No.
Okay.
But it was, you know, it was a 5-ton wrecker, and it was a little bit bigger than the deuce and a half, but it was basically the same situation.
So you went out and you recovered those. How often did that happen, that something would need recovering?
Well, you know, like I would go out with another wrecker and retrieve a 5-ton that was high-centered over a railroad track or something like that, and it took 2 wreckers to pick it up and take it off the track and things like that. And I did convoys with arrangements with the division to haul, to go down to south of July to haul and offload some artillery barrels that were about 40 foot long, 2 of them per tractor trailer. And we had 2 trailers loaded with them. We had on-tow security guards. We had communication. We had the whole thing. And I had the heavy end of the barrel, which was probably about 2.5, 3 feet in diameter. And I grabbed the first chain that was on my laying on my deck of my truck, and I put it around it, and I was picking up the heavy end of it, and I was going a lot slower because of the weight of the barrel. And this other operator, because the barrel's 40 foot long, we had 2 wreckers there.
Right.
He was excelling and going up too fast, and I broke my chain, so I had to grab it. It fell back on the truck bed, and I had to get a heavier chain to put on it. And I told him to slow his raise on his wrecker, and we got him unloaded and whatnot. And went back and did that, and I actually run convoys. One we went and hauled in 5 trucks, and I was in command of the trucks, and we went and met one of the amphibious tractor. So we're going out, and they were blowing up a village. They moved all the inhabitants in the village, and it was undermined with tunnels and whatnot. And so they had these, what they call line charger amphibious tractors. What they were, we hauled these cans of C4 explosive on our trucks, 5 trucks. So we hauled 10 tanks of C4 down to them. They had a rocket inside that they had attached to their ramp on their amphibious tractor, hooked this line charge up to it and shoot them out, and then once they shot them out, then they would explode it. And that's how they leveled the village and maybe caved in the mines and whatnot.
Wow. That's got to be quite a show when that happens.
Well, I wasn't. We were just in the rendezvous point where they come back and picked up more C4 cans.
Wow. What was the? Was it dangerous running convoys? Because I've heard stories about convoys.
Well, that's really what bothered me, because I've thought about that many times. That I was very lucky, because I was in lead truck, and I had a driver, and we had The thing about it is, when you're driving a truck and you're hitting gears and clutching and all that, you can't be carrying or using an M14, a rifle. It's just impractical to be using that and trying to defend. And so we had an A driver. We had no communication and on the 5 trucks. And by the time we got offloaded with that C4, it was late in the afternoon, and within an hour it was dark. And we had to go probably about 35, 40 miles back to our perimeter to get in the security of the defense. And so we were out there at night traveling, and I told him, I says, as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to hit the metal, and I'm going to go as fast as I can, and I'm going to slow down in the vills as we go through them. Other than that, it's every man that's got to basically just do his best to keep up. And I stopped just before we got into our compound and checked out all the trucks to make sure that they all made it.
Did they?
Yeah, they did.
Was scary drive back?
Well, it was just the thought that it was a blitz. I figured they couldn't basically put up an ambush because they couldn't get the word that fast to anybody. Had to put up an ambush, and I figured by just basically running through the place like that, it would suffice and get us back.
And it did.
It did.
Were there ever times over there that you thought, I'm not going to make it back here?
No.
No?
No.
Were there happy memories over there? I mean, is Vietnam happy memories or bad memories or good memories, or what kind of memories do you generally think of when you think Vietnam?
I don't know. I just kept busy.
Yeah, and especially because it seems like in 1965, correct me if I'm wrong, but when we've talked, that you're more in the process of setting up and building for things than you are of really fighting or combat. Is that the way it was in 65?
Yeah. When we hit Chulai, we were, because of the tractors, we were right on the beach, and it was one of the most beautiful areas I'd ever seen in my life.
Really?
It was beautiful, and I loved to pull guard duty early in the morning because I'd see the east sky light up, and it was just multiple colors, and the ocean was China Beach was just so calm and peaceful. That was during the summertime, but during monsoon, it was changed.
Yeah.
And we started out living in squad tents in the sand on the ground.
Okay, so just as primitive as it sounds?
Yeah,
okay.
It is. And then because of that work that I carried the troops to the CB base in Okinawa, we had what we called framing. We could basically set a platform on bomb crates or whatever we could scrounge up in the dump and whatnot, and we built a platform, and then we set this floor down, and then we built the frames to throw our tents over the top of those. Well, this was in the fall, and then monsoon came, and then then the whole scenario changed. It became cold, miserable, rained all the time. You couldn't keep dry, and it just was impossible. And one night the wind come up, and I thought we were going to lose the whole thing. And I started screaming at everybody in the tent, start grabbing the tent because the tent just bellowed up. And I just told everybody to grab onto a canvas and try to hold the tent, because if we lost that tent, we'd be out drenched like ducks in the rain.
Yeah. Did you manage to hold on to it?
Well, everybody grabbed it because there were about 14, 16 people in the tent. Everybody basically had a hold on the tent. And they said, now what do we do? I says, take off your belts and hook them into something. You know, there was loops and whatnot that we could basically strap down to the frame. And that's what we did. We took our belts off and we tied down the tent.
And that moment didn't worry. Was that because it's so rainy and so because the monsoon comes? Was that just a one-time deal, or did you?
No, it was
always
for months. It was for months.
So but how did you not get? Did you? I mean, I'm guessing the tents only kind of kept you dry, from what I've heard.
Well,
over there.
Yeah, they were actually pretty good for keeping you dry. Once you got off the ground, if you were pitched a tent in the sand, it was miserable because you were. If you went, we had a shower tent or something like that, and you just couldn't. If you walked it was Chulai had silicate sand, white silicate sand, and it was just miserable because you couldn't get rid of the stuff. And you got into your bag, or we didn't have bags. We had 2 wool blankets. During monsoon season, we needed 2 wool blankets just to keep warm.
Wow. So it got cold, and you're up north.
No,
you're down south.
Chulai is south of Da Nang.
Yeah. So, but it gets cold. It's a cold rain then.
Oh, it's cold and miserable. Yeah.
So what did you? Let's talk about you. You also had some time. You and I talked before we turned on the cameras and the recorder. How did you? You pulled guard duty. You were MP guard duty for a while.
Oh, that was. That was when the battalion, we moved from Chulai to Da Nang.
Okay, tell me about that.
Okay, well, we boarded another ship. I thought we were going to have to drive up there because it isn't all that far. It's only probably, maybe 100 miles or so.
Okay.
But it was through unknown territory as far as I was concerned. And but we got an LST. We boarded the LST again. And they took us up to Da Nang Harbor, and we disembarked and went to our new camp. And at which time, I was getting very short, and I was having a very attitude about officers in the motor pool because they were rejects and call-ups from retirees that were out of shape, not really too sharp with what was going on with the motor pool, and as far as I'm concerned, very poor commandos as far as.
Right.
And I just basically kind of was defensive with them, and I think they wanted me to get out of there because I was short time, so they sent me to a prisoner war camp as a guard, And the prisoners that I guarded were women with children, Viet Cong, and the Gulf of Tonkin PTO boat people that were blown out of the water, and the resolution that basically started by Johnson's action that basically had the build-up that because of the action of the North Vietnam, they basically had determined that there was an aggressive attack on the U.S.
And so there was a camp for those detainees, a prison.
There were actually we had 2 camps. There was you went in the main gate and you had the one camp, and then a separation with concertina wire on all. It was kind of in the shape of an 8, and the North Vietnamese were in their own camp, and we had guards in their camp, and then we had guards in the other camp, which was the Viet Cong, when they had a wood building where they basically housed the Viet Cong, and then the women and children were basically housed in the kind of a makeshift mess hall and whatnot, and they didn't have beds or anything else. They just laid on the concrete slab.
Wow, that's pretty primitive. Pretty tough.
Well, I felt very sorry for the fact that, obviously these women were basically going with their husband or whatnot, and he was fighting, and they would get captured. And the kids, it was just devastating to see these kids, in this camp like this, because they didn't deserve it. I mean, they were just kids.
Right, and they were growing up in this
environment, yeah.
About how many of them would you say there were?
Oh, I don't know, probably 24 or so.
Okay, and so what was your job day in, day out at that location?
Well, I was turnkey at the main gate, or I was in the camp patrol during the day. We didn't have rifles or anything in the compound. In the night, we didn't have rifles. We had a machine gun and a tower and things like that. But we basically, when we were in either the North Vietnamese compound or in the other compound, we just used a baton, and that was all we had.
Was it scary? Because these guys had technically fought against us, correct? I mean, I guess not the children, but these are being treated as hostile enemy people.
Well, yeah. I mean, what was scary about it was the fact that the North Vietnamese were educated. They had, in their Chinese or whatever it was, they had books, math books and things like that. And they wanted me to just come and sit down, and each one had his own little building. And at night, they locked them in these buildings. And so, in order to break out, they'd have to get out of their hut, and then they'd have to go over the wire. And we had, we had a 60 machine gun in the tower.
Wow, math books.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they were educated people.
Yeah. And so that gave you an idea too, very early on, I imagine, earlier than some, that this wasn't just some guerrilla force. These were some people who had some smarts, right? Well,
yeah. I mean, the Viet Cong that are basically North Vietnamese Viet Congs were entirely different than the captives that they got in Vietnam, South Vietnam.
Right. Did you? So you're in and out gates. Do you have any? Do you have contact with the prisoners there?
Oh yes.
What was that like having? Because it's one thing to be you're in the motor pool, you're managing a truck fleet, and now all of a sudden you're guard duty for prisoners. Those are two pretty different jobs to do.
Well, yeah. But a Marine was a Marine,
Yeah, I've heard that said before. Did you? What did you think of guarding prisoners of war?
Well, when I seen that there was another camp in the same complex, and it was completely separated from the prisoner war camp that I was basically in guard of. It was actually a deserters camp that of military personnel that basically told them to take a flying leap and doing things like that. And it was outnumbered by, there was probably 150, 200 men were in this camp.
And these are our deserters, or?
Yes, they were deserters from the military, be it the Navy and the Marine Corps, the Army. They were, I mean, they were in a lot of trouble.
That's kind of interesting because we don't usually think of if you're over there, you're doing it, but these are guys who either wandered off or said, no more, I'm not going to do it, right?
You know,
So
kind of deserters of their position.
was that hard to see? Here you are fighting, you're over there, you're doing it, and then there are these camps of guys that won't do it. Was that hard to see? How did you?
I felt sorry for these individuals because in the circumstances of where they were maybe and compared to where I was, you know, I mean, we had it soft compared, you know, we had guard duty and things like that, but we really didn't. We had a job to do, and that was our job was truck driving, hauling all the necessary supplies for the battalion and the division.
Yeah. Yeah. When you were over there, what did you miss about home? So Montana's home, Billings is home, and it's a long way from Vietnam. What do you miss about home?
Well, you know, I missed, you know, this the cold weathers, the snow, and things like that.
Really?
And you know, when it was so hot over there and so miserable, you know, I got like heat rash and whatnot. It was miserable because I couldn't even wear long dungarees and stuff like that because it was just kind of like lightning hit my legs and my arms and stuff like that. And they told me that, well, the best thing you can do is just go in or go out in the China Sea and just swim in the salt water. So that's what I did.
What was it South China Sea like? Is that a?
It's beautiful. And during the summertime, you could wade out half mile, and you could just be water up to your chest.
Huh. And so it was. It wasn't all bad duty. I mean, it wasn't all bad. Did you? Have you ever been back to Vietnam since?
Oh no, I haven't.
Do you have any desire to?
Well, I would like to.
Okay.
But I doubt if it'll ever happen.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about you were injured over there. It was working on as a trucking, right? It was
I was operating a
wrecker,
5-ton wrecker. Yes.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about how that happened.
Well, it was a mistake, a bad thing that I did, and we had on the sides of the wrecker, basically describe the wrecker a little bit. It was a extendable boom, 360-degree turntable, and to retrieve with it, you extend your boom out, you elevate your boom and whatnot. We had what we called boom supports that held the boom so it couldn't roll back and forth, and what I did is I just coupled the short boom supports, left them standing upright in the side of the boom, and then I was doing my connections on and off the wrecker. And as I got down, I bumped this one boom support on the driver's side of the wrecker, and it come down and hit me on the head. And I realized that what had happened, I knew instantly that this boom support, which is a pipe, probably 2 sections of pipe that coupled together, about 5 foot long, and it come down and hit me on the head like a sledgehammer.
Wow.
And I thought, well, you know, my legs started crumbling underneath me, and I shook my head and I says, no, Marine, you can't pass out, because if you do, you're going to be between 2 trucks and nobody's going to see you. And so I walked right out in front of another deuce and a half was coming down the road. I was irritated, or they were irritated with me because I come out in front of this truck. He said, "You almost got run over, Marine." And I says, "Well, it could have been that, or I would have died from passing out in the accident. I need to get to a med station." They said, "Okay, we'll climb in the back of the truck." Well, a deuce and a half has a tailgate about 6 foot high and 6 or 7 foot high. So I had to pull myself up into the...
And you're bleeding out your head, right?
I was bleeding, and I got in the truck, and nobody helped me, and I crawled forward, and I said, "Sir, do you happen to have," and a second lieutenant, passenger side.
An Army, right?
And no, he was Marine.
Was he Marine? Okay.
And I says, "Do you happen to have something I can put on my head to stop the bleeding?" So he pulls out his little white handkerchief and looks at that, and then looks at me, and he says, "Yeah, here, Marine, take this." So we get up to the med station, and it was an Army medical medic that basically stitched me together. And I told him to call my unit and tell him what happened, and come down and pick me up.
And he did, and then what happened after that? I mean, did he fix you up, and then what?
Well, they didn't document it because being an Army, you know, there was no documentation about Marines, you know. If I was mortally wounded or something like that, had to go out Good Ship Hope or whatever it was out there, the hospital ship out cruising off the China Beach, you know, there was no documentation, nor was there any documentation when they had the stitches removed in my base camp in Chile.
What is the long-term effects from being hit? I mean, that's a big metal boom, 5 foot long. That's heavy, and you're bleeding. That's hard on your brain. What happened as a result of that?
Well, I have short-term memory loss.
Okay.
I get confused with multiple instructions. I have a dilated left eye. I can't walk a straight line. I belong to a group called Traumatic Brain Injury Group, and part of the problems that I have is that I get very frustrated and angry with people.
Okay.
And that's one of the signs of having traumatic brain injury.
Right. Was it hard? So you came home, and have you had to live with this ever since? Is that?
Yes.
That must have been very hard.
You know, when I was younger, and after I got out of the service, I went to Northern Montana College and got a degree in construction engineering technology, and then also a drafting degree.
Okay.
And, you know, I did good at Northern, and I met my wife, who basically there was an article in the Stars and Stripes in Vietnam about an incident that happened in Wolf Point, Montana, and about an individual was on trial in the courthouse in Wolf Point, jumps out a second-story window and escapes. And this was in Stars and Stripes that was published in Japan. And everybody knew I was from Montana. He said, "Where's Wolf Point, Montana?" I said, "I have no idea." And so I met this girl. The DI always said, if you want a girl that you can marry and take home to mother, you go meet her in church.
Mm-hmm.
So I met this girl in church in a social situation that this one church was having for, you know, people. It was a board, notice on the board about this, you know, get-together, recreational kind of a situation. So I met this girl, asked her where she was from. She said she was from Wolf Point. I says, "Really? Where's Wolf Point at?" I ended up marrying her.
You finally learned where Wolf Point was?
Yeah, I did.
Did you? Let's talk about. So you served. You did some temporary duty as a at a prisoner of war camp. You did your motor pool. What was it like daily over there? Was it boring? Was it interesting? What was?
Well, I had a really I don't know what you'd call him, spit and polish individual. He was a captain, in the Marine Corps. He shaved his head. He basically, we had to pull personnel inspections with rifles and whatnot. And the men in the hooch basically told me, be sure and take your ammo out and brassel your ammo. I said, Bo, I'm not going to do that. And so I had spit shine boots, starched dungarees, blocked ring cap, and my rifle, which my rifle was a beautiful rifle. I salvaged it. I traded my wood stock for another guy's wood stock that was black, as black as your table is there, and it was just he couldn't get anything to do with it. He kept putting linseed oil on it, but it didn't do any good. I says, I'll trade you stock. So I had a fairly decent stock, had a good coat of linseed oil on it. He says, you're crazy, man. I says, no. I says, I'm going to make something out of that. So I was scrounging around the ship and looking for sandpaper or steel wool, and I finally got to a machine shop on board ship, an LST, and I had to go down, way down in the bottom of the ship to find this machine shop, and they gave me some steel wool. I started rubbing this steel wool, cleaning all that black finish off that stock, wood stock, and what I discovered, I thought, oh man, I think I've really done something bad here. And then the more I cleaned it and scrubbed the black finish off of it, I realized that I had really a prize. It was a tiger stock. The wood was light and dark brown, and it went all the way down the rifle. And it was beautiful. I never, ever, ever had any problems in a personnel inspection after that. They'd look at that rifle and say, man, this is a nice-looking rifle, Marine.
So it was just, so you got to clean it up. I'm guessing you didn't get to take that home with you.
Oh, no. Yeah. I gave it to one of the guys that took over the wrecker.
Okay.
And they deflocked me before I left Vietnam.
Okay.
I was a corporal, and they took my corporal stripes off me and made me a private. It says, where you're going, you don't need stripes.
And where were you going? Is that
I was getting out of the service.
Okay.
I extended 2 months in Vietnam just so I didn't have to go back and play military games.
So did you spend, how many months did you spend over there total?
Probably about 10 or 12 months.
Okay. Was it, when you were over there, did you get a lot of communication from what was going on back home, or did you write a lot?
I was communicating with a couple girls, but after I got the Dear John, I just really didn't want to get committed or involved with anybody.
Yeah. Was it over there? You were there early in '65, and are you beginning to see signs of war heating up, or was war all around you?
Well, I think things were getting heated up. I think by the time I checked out in '67, I was.
You were in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Were you at places that got shelled a lot, or
see, that was the thing. When I went to Da Nang, I was assigned to this prisoner war camp, and so I just went back to my unit after a TAD of a month and a half or so.
And TAD is temporary assignment.
Temporary assigned duty. Yeah.
Okay. So you went back to camp, to your camp, and then how much longer did you spend?
Then they pulled me off the TAD prisoner war guard duty, so I could basically go back to the States.
Okay, let's talk about leaving Vietnam.
Okay.
What was that like?
Well, it was an eye-wakener.
Why?
Because I was laying at the Da Nang airport waiting for a commercial airline. Pan American Airlines was serviced in Vietnam. They were basically flying into Da Nang, the airstrip there, and then flying to Okinawa. Well, I was there waiting, and they took me out there probably 8 or 10 o'clock in the morning, and it was all day I was waiting for this plane to come in so I could get to Okinawa. And and then they closed the airstrip down, and they had a plane, and I don't know exactly what it was, but for some reason it didn't have its landing gear down. And they foamed the runway, and I thought, oh, what's going on here? I don't know what's going on. And then all of a sudden this plane comes in, and he looked like he was going way too fast. And the minute he tried to set the plane down on the airstrip, it exploded. Just a big ball of fire.
Wow.
And I thought, oh, it's time to leave Vietnam. And I don't know, some people said that it might have been a deserter from North Vietnam got in and flew this plane to South Vietnam.
Right.
Or it may have been an American pilot that basically had trouble getting his landing gear down.
Yeah. That's got to be pretty shocking to watch that happen.
Well, I didn't know what was happening, until afterwards, and then they started talking about, well, this and that and everything else, but I didn't know, But I finally got a plane, airlines, to go from Da Nang to Okinawa, Hanson, to pick up the rest of my gear, because we only took one sea bag with us because we didn't really need a whole bunch of civilian clothes. We didn't need military uniforms or anything like that.
Did you? What was it like actually leaving Vietnam? Finally getting that flight.
It was a relief.
Yeah. Did you just kind of felt general relief, and then?
Well, yeah. I was getting out of there, and other than the accident I had with the wrecker,
Did you? How long had it been between the time you had the accident with the wrecker and the time you left?
Oh, it was about 6 months.
So did you begin to feel the long-term effects when you were leaving Vietnam? Did you know about the long-term effects of the traumatic brain injury?
No, I didn't.
How hard has it been to deal with that? You talk about some of the ramifications today. Has it been hard getting treatment for that?
The VA basically doesn't recognize it because there's nothing documented on it.
Huh. Just because they never filled out paperwork on it?
Because nobody basically followed through on the situation.
That's got to be very upsetting. Here you did that, and now they won't even support it.
Yeah, well, it's my word against their word. It's like I'm making all this stuff up. And then I went through a process of evaluation by the VA in that they basically did a hearing test on me. I've seen a psychologist who asked me a whole bunch of questions, had me do little puzzles and things like that. I flunked all that. And then he had me do computer repeated questions just to see if I tripped up and answered one way, and then the next time it come up, I answered another way. It was just hours and hours of malarkey. And this individual wrote up a report about, he may have problems, but it was never definitely said that I had memory problems as far as memory loss problems. And I couldn't even do a simple situation like, he says, okay, here's the way you do this. You got 1A, and you have 2B, and you have C3, and all through, and I got up to about H, and what I couldn't concentrate to basically complete the whole thing.
Yeah. Wow. So does it, so when you left, you didn't have any idea that this was kind of going to be a long-term issue. How did you readjust, and how did you integrate back into what did you go back to doing when you came home?
Well, I was a construction remodeling contractor. I worked for various people in Billings. I come back to Billings after I graduated from Northern Montana College, and I got a job working plans in an office construction company. Wells Brothers Construction was no longer in business, and I worked for Ideal Manufacturing. I'm working on plant drawings for fabrication of silos and things like that. I did that Solar Plaza office building, designed for that on 2200 block of Broadwater. I did construction management and design on it. I was the only individual that basically the city had approved plans based on no architectural stamp and whatnot. And the architects and engineers got together and told the city, you can't be issuing permits to individuals that don't have a stamp on their drawings. And I did the construction management on it, and I had used timber, wheel, and truss joists. I got their numbers and figures and all their beam sizes and all the joist sizes and whatnot, and I submitted those to the city, and along with the plans that I had drawn.
Right. Did you when you came home, did people think that you had changed? Did you think you had changed, or were you the same person?
Well, I think I was the same person. I thought I was.
Mm-hmm.
It just in the last 10 years that things have changed.
Mm-hmm. With the memory loss and all that,
Right.
Is that what you meant? Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure I understood right. Did you experience when you came home? Now, you came home in 67, so some of the sentiment wasn't quite as strong as like 68, 69, 70
Right.
against the war. Was there any protesting? What was it like when you came home? What was the atmosphere and the climate like when you came home?
Well, Montana wasn't that attitude, I don't think.
Yeah, you're right.
California, places like that, was more of that attitude. And in fact, they told us before we got out of Da Nang, or not Da Nang, but Okinawa, that don't be surprised if they do not respect what you've done, and that just don't even talk about it. And so I wanted to talk about it because that was part of the healing process.
Yeah. So when you tell people that you were in Vietnam, most of the time, what do they ask you, and what do you tell them?
Well, I just briefly tell them, that I was attached with the 3rd Amphibious Tractor Battalion, and I was a motor transport truck driver, and I did a job over there, and that's what it was. I was hauling and garbage, water, supplies.
It takes a lot. I mean, there was a lot of building, a lot of moving stuff around, I imagine.
Well, yeah, and they used the wrecker a lot to basically unload things that come in on the tractor or on the trucks. Like building materials and things like that, so we could build up on our camps and whatnot.
So a lot of build-up stuff. Did it feel like coming home and working construction, did that feel kind of like a natural fit then after what you had done in Vietnam?
Well, actually, I built a sea hut over there in Chulai.
Okay.
And a sea hut is Southeast Asia hut.
Okay.
And it was something that the Seabees come up with, and that's what they ended up basically building sea huts over there for us. And the Seabees I was impressed with.
Why? Tell me why.
Well, because they basically, their job was basically they built a mess hall for us, and laid the concrete slabs, and they built the structure and whatnot, and then they built all the sea huts we lived in, which was a very good step up from a tent.
Yeah, I imagine you didn't have to strap it down with your belt, right?
That's correct.
Did you when you came back, do you think that your time spent in Vietnam was a good thing?
Well, I thought I did a good job for the Marine Corps.
Okay, fair enough. Do you think that there's when you look back on your time in the military, would it be something that you'd do again?
Well, I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, once is plenty.
Yeah, fair enough. There's been so much written in movies and television about Vietnam. Are there anything that you see, or are there any of the movies or things that you've seen that make you think, yeah, that's kind of what Vietnam was like for me?
Well, it's people like Sylvester or those type of individual actors that basically do all this stuff. It's just, he-men like that. Marines, we wanted to think we were he-men, but we weren't.
Right. It sounds like just a lot of work. It sounds like was it, and I'm guessing, are you eating sea rations, or what are you eating over there?
Oh, yeah, we had sea rats. and they were actually better than meals ready to eat.
Yeah.
You got past the grease and you scraped the grease off, and you had whatever, beans and something like that, or ground up meat and stuff like that, and it wasn't too bad. But I mean, we got a package of cigarettes, 5 Lucky Strikes or Selms or Camels or something like that.
Right.
And I was smoking a pipe, and I was putting this stuff in my pipe and things like that. It was pretty awful.
Yeah, because that tobacco got a little old, I imagine.
Well, yeah, it just wasn't the right stuff, and they cut out all that kind of additions to the meals, and we went to the meals ready to eat.
Okay.
Now that brings up another situation. I had years of separation from the military. I went back into the construction battalion in the Navy as a CB builder.
Okay.
And I spent 17 years there. So I got 3 years with the Marine Corps and 17 years with the Navy Reserve.
Okay.
And I got out just after the 9/11 attack had transpired, and I thought, I've got about 6 months to do what's going to happen to me if the battalion, which the battalion I was in, Battalion 18, was basically sent over to Iraq. And
so you could have very well almost went to Iraq.
Well,
as a CB.
I could have, but I don't think, because I was so short and because of my age and whatnot, they would have just I would have just gone to like the CB base in Texas or whatever it may be,
Right.
some place like that. I don't think they would ever sent me over.
So in the Navy Reserves, you weren't activated again for anything?
No.
All right. Did you, looking back on Vietnam, now that it's been, well, for you, a little more than 50 years, everybody loves it when I do math on that, but it's been a little more than 50 years. How do you see Vietnam maybe differently, or how do you look at it today versus maybe then?
There was a lot of lives that were lost in Vietnam, and our fighting over there was just a big waste.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, I always wonder about the fact if Kennedy hadn't been killed, it would have been a different outcome. Because he was killed in November, I went back into service. And,
so that's one of the unanswered questions in your mind.
yeah, I mean, it just doesn't, I don't know, Johnson basically, he said he was following the dictatorship or the what was laid down by Kennedy, but I don't know if he really was or not.
Right. No, it's a good question. When you looking back, and when people go to study this Vietnam, maybe another 50 years from now, when it's 100 years, one of the reasons we're doing this and recording these is because I want people to be able to look back and say, okay, what did people who were from Montana who served in Vietnam think about? And what do they want us to remember? What do you want people to remember about Vietnam from a guy who's been over there?
Well, don't think of it as a learning experience for the people or people in the nation to realize that, to send our people to war, and they were trying to basically stop communists in Vietnam. And the problem with something like that, it just, it's just the people were uneducated. They were basically very naive, and they were being tossed around from one dictatorship to another dictatorship. And, they were just trying to struggle and make a life for themselves.
Yeah, did you, and you saw some of that?
Well, I went on a humanitarian mission with a Navy corpsman with a Jeep loaded on an amphibious tractor, and we went into a remote village, and some of the things I seen, the people, especially the young infants, they were deformed and gross. Teeth, double sets of teeth growing from their mouth and things like that. And now I understand what Agent Orange, the effects of Agent Orange had on unborn or women that were carrying a child and being exposed to Agent Orange. You know, that's part of the problem, that the VA doesn't recognize that was exposed to Agent Orange. Even though I don't have any of the symptoms, I did have colon cancer, and I've had a lot of problems with a heart ailing situation of atrial which they don't say atrial fibrillation is considered as part of exposure to Agent Orange. They just don't recognize it as a contributing factor. And my kids, I have a son and a daughter, they were born normal and had no complications. That was the other factor, that basically if you had offspring that were born with disabilities and things like that.
Yeah. So remembering those effects and remembering some of that must have been something, that humanitarian mission. So it was kind of...
It was an eye-awakening.
Yeah. And I imagine a lot of poverty.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Did you come into contact with people in Vietnam every day, or were you pretty much on military keep?
No, not really. I did on a lot of different truck situations. Like I went in, the chaplain, he wanted me to drive a truck, or they assigned me to drive a 6x6 to a village, and the chaplain went with me, and we picked up a whole bunch of building supplies and materials that the Vietnamese had built or put together for this chaplain, and he built a church in Chulai. And it was kind of a neat church, made all of bamboos and woven mats and things like that. It was pretty interesting the way that it ended up.
Wow. So they're building church. So there was some humanitarian. We were doing some pretty good humanitarian things too.
Well, yeah, I think there was people over there that were trying to do things right. But, you know, and you're in a war zone, you don't know who your enemy is.
Yeah, say something about that.
Well, I mean, you know, if you go into the Ville and whatnot, you don't know, you know, if there's somebody in there that's basically going to start opening fire on you or something like that. You know, you're always on alert. You always carry your rifle with you. And we had to go in. We had individual people in the villages that would clean our clothes for us and things like that, and we'd pay them for that. And but making contact with the people, and it was interesting because a lot of them were beautiful people. I mean, they were small, delicate, beautiful people, but they had a problem. As they got older, they started chewing betel nut. I don't know if you've ever heard of betel nut.
I have.
And they start chewing it when their teeth get bad, and it's kind of like a Novocaine kind of a thing that numbs their gums, and then they smile at you, and it looks like they're sucking on blood as a vampire.
Oh no! Yeah, it's pretty dark, isn't it? Yeah,
it's awful.
Yeah. Did you have any trouble besides the some of the health problems when you came home? Did you have any trouble adjusting, or did you kind of go right back into kind of life?
No, I think I adjusted fairly well. I got work right away, and because of the fact that I was a Vietnam veteran and I was a Marine, I got jobs working in construction companies and all kinds of things like that.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that's hard to do is you take basically 3 years of your life, and we bring you in, and I'm going to say, wow, 3 years of your life, I'm going to shrink it down into this small little interview. What parts of Vietnam, what stories haven't we hit on that we need to for you, and what have we missed?
Well, I did a lot of missions with the truck and whatnot. One of them was I got acquainted with the ROKs, R-O-K.
Okay.
I don't know if you ever heard.
I haven't. Well,
Okay, Republic of Korea.
okay.
They were a group of fighting men from Korea, South Korea, that they were camped fairly close to our battalion in Chulai. They had 4x4, about 1.5 ton pickups. They had no retrieval trucks to get these vehicles. They were disabled. They would come over and ask me, because I was the dispatcher, and they got acquainted with me, and they asked me if I would, even after I was out of the motor pool as a dispatcher, they would come down to our CHUD and ask me if I would go and retrieve a truck. And I says, well, my truck is broke down because I went on R&R in Japan, and I told the motor transport officer, the only one that was qualified to operate the wrecker, if you have to go and pull an engine out of a tractor, be sure and put the boom support, long boom supports on the boom of the wrecker. And he went out and retrieved a tractor. These tractors were V10 Lincoln gas engines with 2 automatic transmissions, one for each track. And you had to pull them out of the back of the tractor. And then you had to basically lift them up, and you had to drive forward. And the ground was irregular and rough from the fact that the tractors were running over. And so when you were back pulling forward, you had to drop the engine and the transmissions into a cargo truck to take it back and have it surveyed for a new engine. And he basically went out and pulled an engine out of the tractor, but he didn't have the boom supports on it. And so it knocked out 2 or 3 teeth in the turntable. And when I got back on R&R, I couldn't believe it. My wreckers, I have to have it surveyed because they couldn't, it was more than we could basically fix. And so I minted up P&M vehicles just to keep me occupied and doing. I says, I'm not going to PM vehicles. That's the driver's responsibility. I'm not going to crawl underneath in every cotton-picking vehicle in the motor pool just so you can keep your records updated that you have it done every 6 months or whatever it may be.
Right, right. So what did you end up doing?
Well, I just pushed paper just like they did.
Huh. Wow. Wow. Well, that's amazing stories, and like I said, I want to say 2 things. I want to say thank you for sharing your stories.
You're welcome.
And thank you for telling, and more importantly, thank you for serving. Thank you for agreeing to do that.
You're welcome.
Especially over there. That's, what people don't realize is that for a lot of them, even if it's 1 year, but it's months, in cases like yours, years out of someone's life, that's a pretty significant sacrifice. So, Don, I want to thank you for being a part of this. And this has been Daryl Ehrlich for Vietnam Voices, a series by the Billings Gazette, sponsored by Master Lube. I've been today with Don Agan, who was in the U.S. Marines during Vietnam. Thanks for listening.